Okay, Perrie, are you telling me there's a possibility that the Fife property market might actually crash in 2023? Talk to me. Okay, so before we go on with this, Perrie, let's just roll back the clock a bit to autumn of 2022, which saw economic and political instability with the resignation of Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister and the ill-fated Liz Truss 44-day premiership. Now, as we go into 2023, the economic and political turmoil has actually subdued, offering a greater feeling of stability in the money markets itself. And you can see that right today. So on the back of that, what is the expectation for the British and the Fife housing market as we go into the new year?
That's a big question, isn't it? I mean, the biggest issue is inflation, of course. Low steady inflation of around 2% a year is generally seen as good for the economy, yet the higher levels we're experiencing now, not so much. It affects the spending power of the pound in your pocket, and it alters the way that people spend their money, including buying and selling property at the end of the day, because all of that comes into play, doesn't it?
So where does actually inflation come from then?
So at the moment, many will blame it on inflated gas prices. It seems to be all you see in the news just now is the big gas headline, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they're saying that that's because of the Ukrainian issues. However, it's believed by most economists that only 4% of that inflation out of the current 10.7% is because of the fuel crisis.
Yeah, let's be honest.
The other 7% come from, Jim?
We all know, no matter what the government tells us, the whole thing is not about the war in Ukraine that's caused all this. This was way before this. I mean, UK inflation was already running at 6.2% when the Russian tanks rolled up into Ukraine in February 2022, which created the energy price shock. Therefore, where's the rest of the inflation come from?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the catalyst of inflation started really in 2020 with the Bank of England's quantitative easing. I think that's made a big impact. This pumped 450 million of new money. You know, we can't just keep printing the money, Jim, and expect it not to have an impact.
Oh, so, I thought it was a magic money tree.
Well, we would all like one of those.
I just thought there was a magic money tree, and suddenly we just, hey, doesn't matter. We've got plenty of money. And if we don't have it, we'll just keep printing it.
Yeah. And I think
we are when you think about it. And Warren Buffett actually talks about this quite a lot. He says, you know, the first thing what you have to ask yourself is when you print so much money and put it into the economy under quantitative easing, what it's called, well, it's just basically on a credit card as such, on a normal scale. It's like you just borrowing on a credit card, effectively. He always says, you know, you always should ask, and then what? And I've got a funny feeling this is what's happening. This is and then what? So the catalyst for inflation started in 2020, the Bank of England's quantitative easing. Okay, and as you said, they pumped 450 million in new money into the economy, which at the time actually looked quite bleak. The problem was that people had nothing to spend money on. So when things started to get going after lockdown, there was a mismatch of too much demand for goods as people had the money. Do you know the estimate was there is a 185 billion pounds of money that people have actually saved as their household budget since the pandemic. 185 billion pounds. So that's clearly obviously going to cause inflationary pressure.
Well, it will do. You've got all that extra money floating around, and also people's lifestyles change, Jim. So the people suddenly who And it's a shame because there's been specific markets that have been hit by this. You know, hospitality and the hotel industry has been one of the major ones hit, as we know. But a lot of people were then suddenly realised that actually, by not going out every weekend, look at what I've got in my bank account. People then got comfortable seeing that number in their bank accounts, didn't they? And they thought, well, hang on a minute, maybe I'll not go out every weekend anymore now. And all this money I'm saving, I can go and spend it on other things. And so there was a bit of an influx of spend, wasn't there? But just to go back a wee step as well, when you talk about, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on this, Jim, kind of takes us off piste a little bit, but when we talked about that quantitative easing and also the fact that the 450 million was pumped into the economy. One of the things that you have always said is that kind of, not debt as such, but that influx of money going out there, like a credit card debt, is actually the worst possible kind that you can have, isn't it, in regards to debts?
Well, when you look at it, the same amount of goods or services are still there, but they're actually a lot less because everybody stopped production. Therefore, if you've still got all that money floating about and the extra money over and above, then it's automatic economic rules, which is supply and demand. The price dictated by supply and demand. So as there's less goods and services in the economy, and there's more money in the economy, and there's more people chasing less goods and services, the prices start to go up. We've seen that straight away in the property prices, and we're going to talk about that later on. But that's what causes these problems. And it's basically down to, as well, is there wasn't enough supply for these goods and services with the supply chain issues. And I'm going to see the big B, Brexit. It's supply chain issues as well. This meant all the prices went up, i.e. inflation. The catalyst of this inflation was the Bank of England printing far too much money in 2020 with the quantitative easing and the supply chain issues. All easy to say when you think about it, though, in hindsight. It really is easy to say that's the case. But too much inflation is bad for the economy and therefore ultimately the property market. So what two things are going to reduce inflation?
Well, the two things that reduce inflation are either, one, we go into recession, which is what they keep talking about. And the other one is to increase interest rates, which again is what we're starting to see happen just now. You know, there's been that recent increase in the rates. So that's obviously the two major events that are going to impact it. I mean, many find it fascinating that the Bank of England we're talking the UK economy into a shallow recession, if you like, in the autumn. Yet there was method in their madness. It was because they didn't want us to rely solely on the second method of increasing interest rates. Because
this is what I kept saying. This is like what I call the Trump scenario, where he puts something out on Twitter and automatically everybody reacts to it, even though it's not actually happened. And this is what I think the Bank of England's been doing. The Bank of England and the OBR, which is the Office of Budget Responsibility, has actually been putting that message out there every single time, saying we're in recession, we're in recession, we're in recession. And I'm going, but a recession's 2 quarters of successive of negative growth. So, but we've not had two quarters of negative growth.
No.
So we're not technically in recession. So at what point did they redefine the word recession? It's almost like everybody just makes things up to suit their purpose and their story at the time. And you see that with the government and also with the Bank of England as well. You know, they seem to want to rely on this method. So, I mean, a better for the economy to have a shallow, mild recession, but interest rates rising to maybe say 4.5% by the middle of 2023 to reduce inflation, than placing the whole job of reducing inflation on interest rates, because that's what they used to do way back in 1980s, 1990s. You know, and I remember it was either Norman Lamont, or maybe it was Norman Lamont, or it could have been Nigel Lawson, who stood up one day and said, you know, and it's possibly to Margaret Thatcher, it's like, you know, I've not got much chance of actually having economic stability if I'm only able to play one club in my bag of golf clubs. And the one club at the time was actually just interest rates. There was no other think and process or think tank and process on it, on the fact that, you know, there's other clubs in the bag to use when you're playing. But it was just left for one club to use all the time. And it was a huge criticism of the government at that time, and the fact that all the thought is like, oh, take demand out quickly. Let's just increase base rates all the time. Let's just keep increasing interest rates. That'll solve the problem. But what they weren't doing is all they were doing was hitting homeowners and people that had actually, businesses that had actually lent money to grow their business, and it was making it worse. So it's not in my opinion, it's not really the best economic decision to do that. It's fine on a lower level, but not using that at such a high level in order to curb that market, because there's only about 45% of people have mortgages anyway. So the other 55% don't care. They just go out and spend anyway. It makes no difference to them. So you're only hitting 45% of that market. And then when you look at the businesses as well, if you're putting theirs up, then you're putting business expenditure up as well. And that combined with power and energy costs and increasing labour costs and increasing material costs, it could almost cripple a business.
Absolutely. I think it's really short-mindedness of them as well, though, Jim, because what they've done, basically, they've gone route one, haven't they, without any kind of fluctuations out with it. And if you're only playing one route, then actually you're creating potential other risks that you've not factored into it. It's like you go back to when you say, and then what?
Yeah. I mean, if this was the case and interest rates was the only mechanism, it would have to rise to about 7% or possibly more, causing the economy and the property market particularly to stall and thus create a subsequent deep and long recession. The property market has to be buoyant. It has to be stable, and because we rely on it so much in our economic performance in terms of the UK economy. We're unlike any other European nation. We're unlike any other, dare I say, even any other nation in the world, where we seem to have this obsession with the fact that you've got to own your own house. But the benefit of that, though, is the very fact that you then get contractors in to do jobs, which actually is small businesses. You then have equity in your property, which you use later on. When you finally downsize, that's the theory behind it, and then you're able to release a lot of equity in order to provide for your future later on, or even pass something on to your children. So that's more or less why they talk about it. Plus, the banks rely on us all the time. The mortgages, the banks would never exist if it wasn't for a mortgage. The only reason people buy properties in this country is to keep the banks in business. I'll say that again. Think about it. The only reason people buy property in this country, and it's pushed us a lot about home ownership, is because the banks stay in business, because they get to sell you a mortgage more or less every single time when you start off. And that's what they want to do. So they want to encourage home ownership all the time. They don't really want to encourage people who rent properties, because there's more money to be made by the banks in mortgages.
Completely makes sense.
Now, therefore, the Bank of England, when you think about this and take this one step further, with the Bank of England having recently increased the base rate to 3.5%, with more interest rate rises to come in 2023, let's no kid ourselves about that. Right? What does this and the mild recession mean for the Fife property market? Because I will say mild recession, because I'm still quite bullish about the whole UK economy and actually about the Fife property market in particular. Because I still maintain that the property market in Fife is very affordable, because the average price is around about 178,000 for a house in Fife. And if you divide that by the average salary in Fife, you're about 5.5 times the amount. And that's actually very, very tolerable. Even 6 times is still a boom market. So what we're experiencing right now is just maybe a short-term huge oversupply right now in the market as it goes up to its normality and realigns where it should be, and then it'll start to stabilize, and then, business as usual. It's the proverbial of getting to a queue in the motorway, and I sit in the queue for the next 45 minutes, trying to cover 2 miles at 1 mile an hour, and then by the time I get to the end of it, I look about and think, what was the problem?
What happened?
What happened? There wasn't even a lane closed. Nobody had crashed. Nobody was joining on the junction next to you. There was no stoppage or anything like that. So how on earth did everybody come to a standstill for the next 2 hours and take the next 45 minutes and take for the next 2 miles and take all that time to get through the next 2 miles? And it literally was the case that everybody's piled in at one time, and it's just caused that temporary blockage, and we've all slowed down to around about 5 or 10 miles an hour, and that's just caused the problem. So the people at the front are all starting to take off and well it down the road, while we're all still waiting to get to the end of that so we can do the same thing. And that's literally what's happened with the Fife property market right now, I would say.
I would agree with that.
What do you think a recession will do for things like unemployment levels?
I mean, recessions will increase unemployment levels. They always do, don't they, at the end of the day? Because as you said earlier on, businesses are impacted by this. Their costs are impacting. But it can be comparatively low. And we've seen that in the last few years. I mean, depending on the type of roles and jobs that are made redundant, if any, and this is all if any, it will determine the effect on the property market. I mean, until that really happens, Jim, we won't know, will we?
Yeah, and this is actually quite a poignant time to just introduce Andrea. thanks for commenting, Andrea, and I'll just introduce you. Good afternoon. Perhaps the government of the UK and Scotland are deliberately keeping fuel prices high so that people will need to support the greener alternatives. Ooh, are you cynical, Andrea? I think I could answer that question anyway, and we'll cover that in a minute. And then she says as well, this is actually quite interesting, will the increase of to 6% for ADS, which is additional dwelling supplements for second homeowners tax, hurt the investors or holiday homeowners most? To answer that question, I'll keep it on the screen so people can read it. The Scottish Government last week decided to increase the additional dwelling supplement, which is a tax on second homeowners owners who buy second homes, or investors who buy properties to let, from 4% to 6%. Now in England, it's still 3%. So we're double the amount of England here at this point in time. I do believe, yes, in the short term, it has caused a pullback from investors thinking, maybe this isn't right, and also holiday homeowners now begin to think, well, maybe I tell you what, and I mean holiday homeowners are as in serviced accommodation. In other words, they bring tourism into local economies, and even holiday home owners or serviced accommodation investors have actually pulled back as well because their numbers are not starting to work anymore. But more importantly, I think what this is highlighting is there's the investors out there that are actually sitting tight just now and not doing anything because they're concerned at the erratic behaviour of the Scottish Government and how all of a sudden they just make up a policy on the spot and say, by the way, it's enforced tomorrow. And you can't have a government running like this. And this isn't a political thing, but you can't have a government like that and making erratic decisions on the spot and implementing them right away, because it causes people to stop. It causes fear, and if people are fearful, they'll not do anything. Therefore, what you're doing is you're ultimately almost paralyzing people into, I won't do anything right now because I'm really concerned that something else is going to happen right at the back of this.
Yeah, but it does. It creates a paralysis, and people are, as you say, they're in that fearful moment. Well, what next, and how is it going to impact me? So we'll just sit tight and wait and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely, and I do think that's and I think that will ease off if they don't show any more erratic behaviour in the next 2 or 3 months. But they start to continue to do this again and start poking at the housing market again, it will cause a few problems, and it has got a lot of people thinking. I've actually written an article, and it's titled for the Courier, "Will the last landlord left switch the light off on the way out?" And literally, that's how I see it, the way that it's going. The only people that's going to suffer out of that, by the way, is going to be tenants, because there's going to be less choice for them. There's less choice for them, therefore the price of the rental will have to go up. Oh, but I hear you say, there's a rent freeze in place. There's not a rent freeze in place in between rentals. So if you've got a tenant that's moving out at $450 and your market rent is $550, the next rental that you do, you can charge $550 for it. So there's no rent freeze in between. And just to give some credence to that as well about the rent freeze, it's really a no worth its paper it's written on, because most landlords never increased their rent in between tenancies anyway. When a tenant was in the property, I know a landlord has actually had their tenant for about 10 years and they've never increased their rent yet. And I actually spoke to her recently, and she says, I was wanting to increase my rent. I says, what are you thinking about? She says, well, it's about that amount. I went, well, you're no far off the mark. She went, but I've not increased it in 10 years. I went, well, there you go. It just proves that there's all smoke and mirrors, because rents haven't increased really in real terms for the last 10 years. But the Scottish Government would make you believe something else. Now, I know that because I've not increased a lot of my rents for the last 10 years, and there's no increased by what the government's saying. So, if that is the case, then happy days. It's like, oh, it'll be worth a lot more to me, but these are all the erratic decisions that they're making.
It's erratic
It's
decisions.
instability.
Yeah, it does cause instability. And we're talking there about, what would a recession look like? We're talking about the unemployment levels, and until that happens.
Unemployment, I mean, unemployment is sitting at 3.6% just now. And full employment, by the way, in economic terms, is between 4 and 6%, according to the economists. So we're more than full employment. So where do you think unemployment will be percentage-wise? Have you got a thought on that?
To be honest, Jim, I can't actually even see impact in unemployment, if I'm being honest. It says here about it, but I can't see how it's going to majorly impact it. There's so many other factors in play here. I mean, if we look at, everyone's suffering from higher gas prices.
Yeah.
Everyone's suffering from higher electricity. The shopping bills are all higher. Yet with interest rates rising, it'll increase the pressure on household budgets. I understand that, and I know some businesses are, but when we look at unemployment at the moment and the levels that you say were like half of what we kind of anticipate we would be normally. So even if we did start to lose positions, surely unemployment's not going to double in percentage. So I can't see how it's majorly going to impact it.
But even if it doubled, it would go from 3.6 to 7.2. But then full employment is between 4 and 6%. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, I'll be honest, Perry, I was actually saying that, with unemployment about 7%, full employment is between 4 and 6, and that was only about 3 years ago. So does that mean we're just going to go back to where we were 3 years ago? I mean, as far as I was concerned, 3 years ago was pretty good, actually.
It was a healthy position anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of jobs out there that can't be filled just now because we've still got too little people chasing, not too little people.
Tiny
not
people.
just 2 people running along chasing jobs. No, not too little people. There's less people than there is actual employment positions. So basically, we've got about 1.3 million positions to fill, but we've only got about 1.1 million people actually chasing them. And that's normal behaviour and changeover of jobs. So that tells me if unemployment goes up a bit, maybe 2%, for example, to about 5%, we're still in full employment economic terms because people are just moving between jobs and retraining in between. So it might not have a huge impact on the economy overall, and hence the housing market. I mean, interest rates mean higher mortgage payments as well. So higher interest rates mean higher mortgage payments. And if homeowner landlords, for example, is on variable rate mortgage, believe it or not, there's actually only 17 out of 20 homeowners on a mortgage with a fixed rate deal.
So again, it doesn't really impact immediately.
Right. So there's over 90% almost. There's about 90% or thereabouts on fixed rate deals. I've got the majority of mine on fixed rate deals. So this won't have an impact. Some of them are lifetime trackers. Some of them are 5-year fixed rate deals. I've just done them out. So this isn't going to have a huge impact on me. And this is the things. It's these two factors of recession and interest rates that will place negative pressure on Fife house prices. So will that be the case? I mean, let us not forget the pressure is coming off the back of the two of the strongest years in record in terms of house prices and transaction levels.
I think for me, Jim, just to kind of pause on that, at the start of lockdown, I just joined the business and you were kind of having conversations with me about, we're not quite sure how this lockdown is going to go. There's 2 ways it can potentially, it can either fall and stay stable, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change. The government, everyone was talking about a recession and prices crashing then at the start of the recession because people couldn't move and everybody was in lockdown. And look what's happened over the last 2 years. I mean, you demonstrated it on the Sunday slot as well, like how much the prices have increased over 2 years. And now we're seeing that kind of normality and stability. It's a bit crazy, really, in how it's impacted prices overall. And even if there was a drop, as you say, would that drop really harm us in any way? Because actually, we've had boom for 2 years.
To put it in perspective, Fife property prices have actually gone up 31.3% in growth since the start of the pandemic in March 2020.
Exactly.
I mean, this is quite interesting when you compare it against the UK average, because the UK average has actually risen by 27.4% or 44,700 since March 2020. So before I tackle the issue on house prices in 2023, I'd like to look at a number of transactions, actually. I mean, too many, the number of properties selling is irrelevant. See, this is where people get confused. They talk about the price of the property being the most important thing, but the health of a property market is typically to do with the number of properties selling, because that shows healthy. Because if it stays stable and it stays on the average amount every single time, as it was before, or maybe above average, when people get new properties, again, I go back to saying that you need paint and decorators, you need carpets, you need curtains, you need all these fittings, you need all these different materials and all these different furnishings and fittings. Everybody does it. Even though they say, I'm going to take all my old furniture with me, I think I'm probably the only person that'll ever do that. Most people actually get new furniture. And then, it's an opportunity for them to get, because they're a growing family. They've maybe been in a one-bedroom flat or a one-bedroom property or a two-bedroom property, and now they've got a four-bedroom. It's like they've still got to buy stuff for the next bedrooms, the beds, the bedspreads, all the rest of it, and they have to get it from somewhere. So it's the local economy that benefits for that reason, with people spending. So I would say it's more important than house prices. And I believe the best way to judge the health of the Fife property market is the number of people moving in the housing transactions. That's what I would say. So you could I kind
of agree with that, because if you think about it logically, say the average house price, as you said, is 178 in Fife at the moment, and it can stay at 178. But if two properties sell at 178, then it's 178.
It really is completely irrelevant, because if it goes up to 180 or it goes down to 175, every other property in Fife has an equal reduction or increase. So all it means is, by having your house on its own, and you've actually locked yourself into that, is you've locked yourself into the stable increase or decrease of the price of the Fife property market. So you've actually stabilized your position. Whereas if you don't lock yourself and you don't buy a property and you're not on the property ladder, then you leave yourself to the market forces of property prices going up or property prices coming down. And effectively, if you really need a home, you're taking a gamble.
Yeah. So on that then, Jim, so why do you think that Fife people should really be more concerned about the number of properties transacting than the actual value of them then? Why do you think that?
Well, many economists actually believe that the number of property transactions is actually a better judge of the health and the actual virility of the housing market. And the higher the number of people moving home, the better for the whole economy than the smaller number of property transactions, whilst the same can't be said for higher house prices. Think about that. The more properties actually changing hands, the better it is. If I just explained why. But the higher house prices means less properties possibly changing hands. So house prices shouldn't be the gauge for the health of the property market. Transaction levels have been quite high actually in the last couple of years. I mean, 6,210 households per year have actually moved home in Fife since lockdown. Now compare that to the long-term 19-year average of 5,850 per year. So there's quite a lot more in there. There's another almost 400 properties. That's 400 properties with people buying new furniture, solicitors transacting, estate agents transacting, mortgage companies doing business. Everybody's getting paid as a result of that. They're getting their pays locally because that's usually where it's all done. They then go to the shops and spend money because they're making money. Therefore, the whole economy on a local basis is actually healthy as a result of the more transactions actually in the property market. So looking at the stats coming through in the last couple of months, maybe we will settle for a figure somewhere in between these two figures above, and we've just spoken about. Yet it's nowhere near the sub 4,750 annual figure of home movers moving in the credit crunch in the 2008, 2009, and 2010 timeframe. That's a huge drop. I mean, when you look at that, you're talking about probably about 1,500 properties.
It's about a quarter.
Yeah, that's 25% reduction in the number of transactions. Think about 1,500 properties in the Fife market, think about how much people spend on the whole property transaction. Mm-hmm. So you've got, and I'll take my wee quick calculator. How much do you think? I mean, you've got mortgages, you've got legal fees, you've got furniture, you've got painting and decorating, you've got carpets, you've got maybe repairs or improvements you want to do in terms of new kitchens, new bathrooms. So how much on average do you think a house would actually spend?
With all of those fees taken into account, I would say you're 20k plus.
Okay, so take 20, multiply it by 1,500. You're talking about £30 million worth spent. So £30 million worth extra is spent in the local economy when you look at it as of now compared to as of the credit crunch. That's why property transactions, the number of transactions, is the most important, because it's a good benchmark measure for the health of the property market itself, and the Fife property market in particular, and also of the UK property market overall. So let's look at let's go on and look at Fife house prices in 2023. Where's a good place to start then?
So a good place to start on to judge house prices, how many reductions are taking place on the properties that are already on the market. So not necessarily what has transacted, but actually what is being advertised just now, and have they had to look at price reductions. So, in the last 3 years, the average number of price reductions for the properties for sale in Fife was 63.3 reductions took place per month. So that's 63.5 properties every month decided. Actually, for whatever reason, the price
point wasn't about 600 a month sold. There's about 600 a month actually sold on average, thereabout.
10,
so
11%?
that means, about 10%. That's okay. That's tolerable. I mean, that's normal.
So, I mean, in October, there were 150 price reductions, and in November, 135 in comparison to previous months. So that's a big jump.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Is that just generally people are actually getting, oh, well, I've got unrealistic expectations here?
I think, I mean, certainly what I have experienced when I have gone out is that people have heard about what's happened through lockdown. They've maybe not took advantage of it and not sold in that window of time. So they're hearing about the people when they were getting 15 and 20% over. And so you're going out, you're doing the valuation, or we've got people that are on the market just now, and then you take an offer to them, they're going, whoa, hang on a wee minute. I was expecting 15, 20%.
Yeah, it's expectation.
And so it's about that clarity point of saying to them, but actually that 15 or 20% has already now been built into the value of your house, because the home report has now caught up with that 2 years worth of statistics, and whatever has happened in that location where that property is, that value is benefiting anyway from that increase. So they're seeing the increase there, but they're almost wanting to double dip, Jim, some clients, and they're thinking, well, I know that I've seen that increase, that's great, but I still want to get 10%, 50%, 20% over.
Yeah, because all my figures, and I want to have a mortgage-free lifestyle, and it's like, guess what? It might not happen like that for you, and you have to come to terms with that, or you have to do what everybody else did in the credit crunch. You hold out and you end up losing out overall. That's ultimately what it is. You will find though the 10%. I wouldn't be surprised if they were motivated to move because they'd actually tied themselves into another property purchase, or they've left it till last minute to actually decide to move, and therefore their house is no longer fits their requirements, or possibly as well, it's maybe parties going their separate ways, so they're in a position where they're kind of forced to sell. Or it could be their circumstances have changed financially, and therefore they've actually said, I'm going to have to sell because I can no longer afford my mortgage. But so that's normal. That's 10%. So we're looking at 150 now, which is a bit more. So that's about 20%. But as I said, if you count all these different things I've just spoken about and collate that together, then probably about the 20% is probably accurate now, because of changes that have just happened in the rise in base rates, the financial positions changed for people, their employment's maybe changed for people, the cost of living's maybe changed for them. So therefore, that's not surprising. But that's not a case to go, oh my God, the world's falling in. It's like, that's not a case, and that's what the picture the media would actually paint, but it's not. It should not be like that at all. Homeowners have been more realistic with their pricing then, and the price that one will achieve for their Fife home today and for the rest of 2023 will ultimately be lower, and one would have than one would have actually achieved in the spring of 2022. So that's the expectations. We need to come to realization that this is where we are. Yet, as most Fife people buy another property when they sell, and most of the time they move up market, the price you would have had to pay on the next purchase would have to have been even more. Yes, the price of Fife property will be lower in 2023 by between, I'm predicting probably between 5 and 10%, but I tell you what, I'm still holding out to say that it's actually going to be less. I'm only in on the side of caution because folk will say, you said, and it's like, I'm still quite bullish and think to myself, you're only 5.5 times the multiplier, and people aren't possibly going to be losing their jobs. And the cost of living crisis, maybe, I still say it's the cost of living will increase. I don't like the word crisis. I don't buy into that scenario. The cost of living will increase. They'll have to tighten their belts a bit more and actually decide. It's like, I tell you what, that holiday I'm going to go next year maybe isn't going to be extravagant as I thought, because we know there's 15% in everybody's household budgets on average. It can actually be reportioned to another, reallocated to another budget, because 15% is actually to do with luxuries. In everybody's budget, and I mean like things like going out for dinner, going out to shows, going on holiday, spending on things you really don't need but you do want. So we're going to get down to we need it rather than we want it. So we're going to go back. I'm not going to buy 2 of that. I'm going to buy 1 of it instead. I'm not going to be as extravagant as Christmas as well. I'm going to cut my cloth to suit my purpose.
So when I'm buying new shoes, Jim, I'm not allowed to buy a blue pair and a black pair anymore. Is that what you're telling me?
I'll just get a multicoloured blue and black. Just buy a blue and a black one and wear them, and I'll know straight away you've made the right decision when you come in with a blue one and a black one on your feet. And I go, oh, good choice. You've obviously thought about that. When you think about it, these levels that we think are actually predicting to be achieved next year at the 5 and 10% less, they're actually just back to spring 2022 against the 2022, and nobody is complaining about that.
Nobody was complaining about it.
We're at 10% increase now. We're at 8 and 10% as it stands now for the last 12 months. So if you get to next year and it goes down by 8 and 10%, we're back to the spring of 2022 almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And anybody that moved in that time, Jim, the chances of them moving, the average person moves every 7 years. So the chances of them moving and being impacted now are non-existent, unless something major is changing for them in life and they do need to move quickly.
Yeah.
If you're someone that hasn't bought and sold in the last 2 years and you're now on that journey of wanting to do it, well, actually, it doesn't really impact you at all, because wherever you're going, you're benefiting from that same reduction. So it actually balances itself out, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a record amount of equity in people's properties. So it was, and I'm sure I had actually calculated this before, and it's something like the average amount of equity in everybody's properties is round about 40%. So if you take a hit for 10%, it's like, I never had that in the first place, because most people have actually held on to it for so long that the increase will be, you'll never even notice it, because you've never noticed it in the first place because you never had it. The only people that will get a hit is the people that have actually remortgaged their properties up to the hilt in order to get something else. Hopefully you've actually spent it and reinvested it in your property or invested it in something else. It actually pays your return rather than actually just going out and buying a holiday, which is what happened in the credit crunch.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. People like Northern Rock were irresponsible because they were telling their brokers at the time 125%, that'll do good. So you can let them borrow 125% the price of their property, because it'll increase in the years to come. And you don't need to get them to reinvest and buy a kitchen or anything for their house. They can go out and buy a car if they want, or have a holiday. That's no happening today.
Lots of people did get impacted by that, and lots of people took them up on that offer, and it was a disaster.
Yeah. And that's why the run on the bank came, because of liquidity. And we're going to talk about this. So the final thoughts on this. What is the final thoughts on this now?
I mean, several economists, commentators are preaching doom and gloom, as we've just discussed, but primarily for the property market in 2023, yet things are very different from the credit crunch that we spoke about there as well in 2008, 2009. So it's not the same situation that we're in at the moment. The property market crash in 2008 and 2009 was mainly because, as we said, the banks and the building societies, they stopped lending money because of actually the irresponsible lending that took place before that. And that's why it's called the credit crunch, because it was all about credit, wasn't it?
That's the mortgages. If there's no mortgage availability, therefore therefore nobody can buy a house. Nobody can refinance a house. Nobody can actually get anywhere. But there's a huge amount of money sloshing about in the banks now. I was speaking to a bank today about, 2 million. And they were going, no bother. I'll give you a base plus 2.5. Really? It's like, wow. And I can do it. And now, see what's happening here. See what's happening here. And now they said, you remember it was only for 5 years now. Well, we can do it for 10 years now. See how that's changing. I said this about 6 months ago. When all the products they could sell have been sold and they can't sell you anything else, they start to become more creative in how they're thinking. And that's why the UK government's allowed them to lift these chains off themselves of things like stress testing. And also of lenders' limits about what they can lend to the market overall on a global, on a huge basis. And that's why you've got all these investment houses rubbing their hands going, hallelujah. It's like bonus time. There's no caps on my bonus anymore. How creative can I get in lending money to people? Because there's no caps on their bonuses anymore. So this is where all the wee wheels start to turn in their mind about how they can do things, how they can get around all these wee potential loopholes that they can find in the system to get through the nooks and crannies. There's a great saying, is water will always find a way. And I could say that bankers will always find a way as well, but we could say it with a different letter at the beginning, can't we?
Well, bankers are very good at it, aren't they?
But I mean, there's two differences this time round, Perrie, isn't there?
Absolutely.
First is the introduction of the mortgage market review, the stress testing, which was in 2014. But recently, it's not been a requirement anymore by the Financial Services Authority. I think it's the Financial Services Authority or Financial Conduct Authority. They're saying that they don't need that anymore. But some banks are actually still being quite responsible because they're actually still applying it. So they're not daft because they don't want to be caught out again, especially because if they get caught out again, then they will be completely responsible this time round because they should have learned the lessons before, and this is why it's important. But
it's a safeguard as well, though, Jim, isn't it, for the banks? And at the end of the day, if householders
over a period of time, you know what happens. This all gets forgotten about. People forget about it, and then the greed starts to get in, and then they start to go, who else can I lend money to? Have you got you're on benefits? Oh, I could lend money to you, no bother. Are you want a 100-year mortgage? Yeah, I could do that now. Because I mean, Boris Johnson talked about lifetime 100-year mortgages. So this will all come to fruition once they exhaust it. It's the typical example about franchises. McDonald's. When people say McDonald's is never going to appear in leaving, well, why? Because they're not making enough money out of leaving. But you've got to understand, once McDonald's saturates all the cities and all the bigger towns, then they have to go for marginal business. And even if they're making a small profit, it's better than making no profit at all. So that's why they've ended up in leaving, for that very reason. So they'll just saturate the market as much as possible till it can tolerate it. And that's how they work. That's how all businesses work. When I looked at Greggs years and years ago, Greggs announced a profit of 16 million. 16 million pounds. They were like, fanfare, all the flags out and everything, up and down the street, with their brass bands. But when you worked it out based on the number of units that Greggs had, every single unit was only making £15,000 at a profit. See that marginal business? It made up with all the units and duplication, made 16 million for them, all because they had hundreds of units making 15 each. So this is how the mortgage market works. This is how the banks work. They go for marginal business eventually. So we'll have to be careful of that. So the mortgage market review did that, and the stress testing was put in place. However, over a period of time, I think it's going to begin to lapse. But you're talking about 5 and 10 years down the road. Home buyers taking a mortgage must have undergone the stress test, on the interest rates to obtain the mortgage in 2014. Now, they were stress testing it between 6 and 7% on some occasions. So we're not even at that level yet. We're base plus. We're base plus 2. There's fixed rate deals out there right now are almost at the knocking on the door at 5%. So the stress test is a safeguard to ensure the household income can continue to be the same, and the homeowner can still afford the higher levels. The second is the banks and building sites have a much higher cash reserves. This is why I talked about liquidity. Higher reserves will ensure they can continue to lend money, so mortgages are available for everybody, although at a slightly higher interest rate than a year ago. So with mortgage rates falling back as well, because they are falling back. And I've actually spoken to some lenders, and they're actually saying, fixed rate deals could actually come down in the new year. They actually think quite quick, because it's now been proved it's quite a stable market. And our pound is now strong against the euro, and stronger against the euro and against the dollar as it was before. It's more or less recovered. So there's a lot of stability in there as well. So with mortgage rates falling back, with some very attractive fixed rate deals, again, as I said, knocking the door at 5%. I just got 4.91 for 5 years.
Yeah, it just shows you it's there, isn't it?
And that's on buy to let on a limited company. And so that's actually quite surprising for a limited company. And this is a development that may continue into 2023 as banks and building societies actually obtain cheaper funding sources. The key here is if they can get cheaper funding sources, and because of the stability in the economy, the funding sources are now saying on what we call the swap rates, they're now saying, yes, absolutely, we can actually give you better swap rates because we believe your economy is on a more stable footing than it was under the Truss government.
Well, they can buy it, sell it cheaper then, can't they?
Yeah. And then they can compete for business by driving down the price of mortgages, which would only be good news for the Fife property market. I mean, that's my thoughts. I mean, what's yours?
To be honest with you, I have to agree with everything that we've discussed so far. I don't see major impacts in regards to the values. Yes, there is an alignment now. There may be a slight reduction. I know you said 5 to 10, maybe a wee bit. Last week it was between 4 and 8. We'll wait and see how it actually pans out. But I think because actually 45% of people have a mortgage and 97% of those are on a fixed rate, I can't actually see how it's going to majorly impact us at this moment in time, Jim.
Yeah.
I think it's about confidence that people have. I think it's about people equipping themselves with facts, which is why we like.
Can I get a hammer and a nail out and just go, you've hit the nail on the head. It's all about consumer confidence.
Yeah.
And the thing that's destroying consumer confidence right now is the media. And if you work that back, who would want to destroy consumer confidence to curb inflation? Bank of England.
Yeah.
The government. That's why. And you could say that in the background, there's maybe a bit of smoke and mirrors going on in the fact that there's information getting fed deliberately to the media in order to downplay this situation and actually make it worse than what it is, in order to curb spending, in order to make people concerned, in order to make them pull back on their spending, because that's what's pushing everything forward, and the demand. There's no surprise there as well. It's like, you'd seen it in the media about energy prices. It's like there was proposed ideas about we'll give you incentives to actually cut back on using your energy during the winter period. And it's like, well, I don't know what happened to that. That disappeared, didn't it? They were going to give the incentives and disappeared. But the government's given subsidies, and it's announced today that borrowing, if you looked at the deficit is really high right now, and the deficit I'm sure it was 22 billion that actually just said recently, today. So the deficit for the month, UK deficit. Let's see what it says. BBC, British Bullshit Corporation. It is, isn't it, though?
At least you didn't go to CNN.
Yeah, I know. UK, I'm sure BBC was out today saying this about the UK deficit. BBC News. Let's see what it says. And it says on UK finance. I can't see it. Nothing's jumping at me right now. Market data. Let's go into market data. I mean, the FTSE's up. Actually, I'll maybe let you have a look at this while I scroll through. And this is where people actually get to see what I'm looking at and what I'm doing. This is actually probably quite a good thing for a lot of people. Paste in there. And then I'll show that on. So the indicators I look for, and I'll share that screen with you. We've got a wee bit of time. We've got 5-10 minutes. So the indicators I'm looking on here is on the BBC data site. So I look at this every single morning, and it kind of gives market data. I mean, the FTSE is actually quite buoyant, so that means the market's actually quite positive towards any things that's actually happening, especially with that news that came out. And if you look at the currencies. You're sitting at against the dollar, the pound against the dollar, you're sitting at 120, which is where it was before. The euro is 114, which is where it was before Truss as well, the government came in. So it's actually still all quite looking in the right direction. Oil, I mean, oil was only $82 a barrel. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, oil was $82 a barrel. Why is oil so high in price then that we're buying at the pump? That confuses me, why that is the case. And then I go on to look at things like the economic situation, your money, and the economy. You've got the economy there as well. So you get to look at these things as well. And they're good indicators. I mean, energy bill drives record government borrowing. See, there it is there. So this is their headline. Energy bill helps drives record government borrowing. And then they go on to say that the government bond has hit its highest since November level on record last month, driven by costs of supporting households with rising cost of living and energy bills. To me, these are one-offs. So that's why the market's actually responded quite well, because these tend to be, they're one-offs and they won't exist again. So the borrowing, the difference between spending and the tax income has reached 22 billion, a rise of 13.9 billion on November 2021. The interest on the government debt is also surged by 50% to 7 billion. So that's another figure in there. It's in there as well. The Office of National Statistics said inflation was the main factor behind the rise in borrowing. So that's the type of things I'll look at in terms of that. And it also launched, the to bail everybody out and give them incentives. The energy support in the households and the business, that's around 6.5 billion extra spending a month. So if you take that 6.5 billion out of that 22, you're down to 14.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're saying last year at this time was 13.9. So you're no worse off than you were the year before. And at the base level, core value terms. And this is the difference. So if you look at that, that's what the economists are looking at. They're saying, okay, this is a one-off. You're bailing people out with 6.5 billion with that in that month. If you bring the 22 billion, take the 6.5 billion off, you're about where you were last year. And last year was pretty good. So overall, this is how the money markets respond and think to themselves, and the economists respond and think, okay, at its very core, we're still okay in comparison to where we were last year. So nothing to worry about here. But you can see that headline as it kicks in. And it's like, biggest borrowing on record in November since 1993. That's what it's got. And that makes people panic. And that affects overall consumer confidence, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
See what that is? So this is all smoke and mirrors designed to do that. So what people need to do, and this is when I come back to saying at the base level, the borrowing, this is like you saying your household budgets. I have a great thing where I look at my household budget and I look at all my core costs. In other words, what's my council tax? Because I've got to pay that. What's my mortgage? Because I've got to pay that. What's my electricity and my gas? Because I've got to pay that. And everything else, it's fixed. In other words, you've got to pay it every single month regardless. What have I got? What I need, not what I want for food, what I need for food at its core basis. Once I've got that figure, I know everything after that is variable. Okay, it's not fixed. I don't need to spend it. Therefore, I know where I am. So when a bank comes to me and says, "Oh my God, you're spending a fortune a month," I go, "No," because about 200's going to pensions, about another 700's going to investments. So I can switch that off anytime I want. So you think I'm actually spending X amount a month, but actually I'm spending about £1,000 less than what you think I'm spending because of that. So my core basis for my costs and my budget is right down there, and I know what I can run on then every single time. And that's how budgeting is normally done. And that's exactly how you should look at it in terms of the UK economy. The same thing, that's what we're doing. That's a one-off with that. And we might choose to keep bailing out until where we are until March. And that'll be every single month. But at its core lending, it's right there right now. And it's the same as what November 2021 was. If they had just reported, it's the same as November 2021 when you bring it down to the basics in real terms.
Nobody would do that.
There would be no headline. There'd be no headline to report.
Exactly.
But that headline then frightens people, and that's what causes indecision. That's what causes paralysis. That's what affects the economy overall, and that's what potentially affects the housing market as well. Therefore, I think it's contrived overall by a combination of the government, the Bank of England, and the media wanting to curb people's spending to bring back inflation quicker than what they forecast it could be. Which again makes me think I'm quite bullish on the economy next year, and I actually don't think it's going to be as bad as what they say it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're talking about the property market and how it's going to be 2023, but you've just touched on something I think it's really vital that people kind of take into consideration for themselves to actually give themselves a bit of a comfort blanket. I think it's really important for everybody to do a financial health check on themselves in regards to sitting down and doing that exercise. Billy and I do that continually, every 6 months.
Do I need to? You hear everybody saying, it's like, and if I say, oh, your next holiday's at Cancun, oh, I'll have it, where's my phone? And you'll spend about 6 hours looking at your next holiday, but you'll not even plan. You'll not even spend 3 hours planning what you need to do in terms of your household budget and your financial future. But most people will spend ages. People will give time and money to what they want. There's always money and there's always time for what somebody wants. I can guarantee you that, because anybody that tells me out there they've got no money for anything, if you've got a car and your tire burst on your car and you didn't have a spare tire, what would you do? Oh, I'd go and get it fixed. Okay, where did you find the money for that then? Work that one out. My boiler's gone down. It's like, oh, I'll just get it fixed. Where did you find the money for that then? I thought you said you had no money. People have money for things that they think's important to them. We all give priority to everything. There's your version of the truth, there's my version of the truth, and then there's the facts. I'll leave you with that one.
Yeah. We'll deal with facts. We only deal in facts, Jim.
Absolutely. Facts and advice will set you free. That's us. That's us. And we'll see you on for the Saturday show. I've got a Saturday show with Richard. It's going to be about Lettons. It's going to be fantastic. I've got my update on Christmas night. Yes, I will be live on Christmas night. I will be bored halfway through in the day. I will have to do a live on Christmas night. And then we'll be back at the Wealth Creation show on Monday, and it's a bit earlier this time. It's half an hour early because Richard wants to get away to his uncles or his dads or whatever for the Boxing Day celebrations. But we're going to do it live at 12 o'clock on Monday. The Wealth Creation show will be the next chapter. I'll be talking about my next set of properties, what the lessons I've learned from these properties as well. And that's us. It's bye-bye from me.
Bye-bye from me. And from him.
Bye from
that way.
See you later.